We kick it off here while a couple more people are trickling in. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Center for Civic Engagement Office Hours session, Ethics and Artificial Intelligence. My name is Amy Oland. I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement here at OU, and my office is thankful to the center for allowing us to partner with them on this series. Before we get started, just a heads up, session is being recorded, and please feel free to submit your questions via the Q&A function throughout the discussion. That being said, I'm going to kick it over to Dave Dulio, Distinguished Professor in the Department of Political Science and Director for the Center for Civic Engagement. My gosh. Take it away, Dave.
Thanks, Amy. And thanks to the Office of Alumni Engagement for their partnership in office hours. If you are new to office hours, welcome. We're glad to have you. If you are a returning office hours participant, we're glad you're back. If you are new, this is a session that we do several times a semester where we take on what we think are timely topics, interesting topics, and highlight faculty experts. And we're going to do that tonight with two of my faculty colleagues around an issue that is everywhere, it seems. Artificial intelligence has so many different applications. It is popping up in conversations about all sorts of things that when I hear it, I think, oh, how is that possibly AI related? But it turns out it is. It even came up with President Biden and President Xi Jinping yesterday. They agreed that they weren't going to use AI, or they were going to limit the use of AI when fighting wars with drones and even nuclear weapons. So clearly timely topic, important topic, and I am delighted to have two, as I said, faculty colleagues with us tonight who are experts in AI. Professor Fritz McDonald is from the philosophy department, and you might wonder, boy, how is that related to AI? Well, let me tell you, Fritz is an expert. He has published a number of papers on the ethics of AI, which we are going to get into. And our second participant tonight, Dean of the Honors College, Graham Harper, who also has a vast amount of knowledge about AI. He is a co-chair of the Oakland University AI Task Force, and maybe he'll tell us a little bit about what that's all about as we get into things. So guys, let's start with an easy one for maybe some folks who are not as well versed in artificial intelligence or what it's all about. Can you just give us a 30-second snippet on what it is? What is AI, and what does it mean in maybe some different contexts? Let's start with Graham.
Sure. I mean, I think I give a really broad brush approach to this, David. I think one of the things with machine thinking and machine learning is at the core of this. Artificial intelligence has been around for quite some time, indeed, as a concept. 1950s, machine thinking, machine learning was part of what came out of it, in a sense, the ideas of what we could accomplish in World War II in terms of what machines could help us with. So there's a long history of machine thinking and machine learning. What we're really talking about, and I'll pass it over to Fritz, but I think what we're really talking about now is a specific version of it that was natural language processing. And what might amaze people is that they may have heard of ChatGPT, for example. It's one of the big buzz industry areas. It's one of the big areas of growth that's been occurring only since November 2022. So, given here we are, it is not that far back. And yet that, as you say, the impact of this new version, or in fact, this evolution is incredible. So, yeah.
Fritz.
I would say that AI involves machines doing things that are mental activities that sometimes are ones that humans and other animals can do. Sometimes the machines do them worse than human beings can. Sometimes they do them significantly better than human beings can. But I think it has primarily to do with doing the sort of things that we use our minds to do. I mean, a robot, a very simple kind of robot, or even a simple kind of machine, can do physical things that human beings can do as well, better or worse. But I think when it comes to mental activity, being able to, like I said, engage in those kinds of activities is a mark of artificial intelligence.
So there are that makes me want to ask a follow-up question, right? There are some things that AI can do better than people, and there are some things that it does worse. Can you give us some examples? Because we never hear about the stuff that it does worse, right? At least I don't think that's part of the conversations that I have.
Well, what I would start with is, in fact, talking about GPT and other large language models like that. Sometimes they don't tell the truth as well as a human being might. Now, human beings can lie and human beings can confabulate things, but these machines have a tendency to overconfidently give false information. The term that people have been using lately is hallucinating. So if you're looking for 100% accuracy from GPT, you're not going to get that right now.
Yeah, I think
so. Is that in?
So I was going to say, I think that's right. And it's also the prioritization that is interesting. So it may not necessarily be wrong, but the kind of neural processing that happens is not necessarily prioritizing what might occur if humans were doing it. So, it's non-humanly right, if you like, on occasion.
So as we start to think about, well, maybe they are philosophical questions, right? And then I guess I'm thinking about this in terms of, Fritz mentioned robots, right? And that we automatically assume or gravitate to engineering, right? I mean, and folks are building these robots and they're carrying out these tasks, right? Whatever that might be, but they're, as you said, physical tasks, right? When we get into the mental side, right? That's and thinking, right? Or at least I think that's all mental, right? Then it does become we can have questions of philosophy and ethics, right? So as a way to start that off, who stands to benefit most from AI?
I think right now,
yeah.
Right now there are a small number of companies. If we're talking about the sort of AI that Graham was talking about, the machine learning, large language models, these kinds of massive AI systems with literally hundreds of billions of parameters in them, it's only a small number of companies that can achieve this sort of thing. And so it's companies like OpenAI and Microsoft and Google, major tech players that we're familiar with, Meta. They stand to gain quite a bit in terms of profits and attention from potential shareholders by using this technology and developing it when there's so much attention being paid to this right now.
And it is a question of you have these multi-agent models. So AI obviously draws down on big data. You've got then who controls each agent within that data stream that then feeds it. You've got questions then of what the biases might be in terms of that data anyway. So as Fritz said, it sort of builds on this model. It is not that dissimilar from the kind of media models we've seen for many generations, for many years. This idea of who controls the sort of narrative. Once you've got those kind of connections across a stream of potential agents there, so it does get interesting as to even drilling down to find out who is benefiting most, because it could well be that's hidden within that network.
So that's an interesting, again, way to think about it, because when I thought about that question, right? I mean, who benefits? I was not thinking about monetary benefit, right? Because that's what these companies are going to, that was your first answer, right? So what about, the public good? Is there a societal benefit to AI?
Well, I would say there is, and I think there's some stuff there here that we need to explore pretty closely. One of the areas at the moment that's super interesting is the ability to crunch data at a high capacity rate and a high speed when it's related to a medical problem, for example. The question then becomes where does the human fit in that narrative? And I posed this with a group of students only maybe a week ago, and they were all happy optimistic about AI, except when I said, well, okay, imagine you went to an ER and everything that occurred through a machine network, and no human was involved until they decided that you had to have something done to you. And you'd say, well, who decided that? So there is some interesting questions there about benefit, but I think ultimately in those areas that involve that speedy crunching of so much data, so incredible amounts of data so fast, there is potential as long as we understand the dangers.
And what are some of those dangers? Can you point to some of those, or are they just unknown?
Well, I don't know how much they're unknown as only predictable to an extent. And again, I'm sure Fritz has got some stuff on this, because I think one thing that fascinates me is, where is the control? What point do you assume control, and what point do you assume? There's an interesting question here, which again is more philosophic, but it's, are we talking about sort of epistemic trust? In other words, we're talking about the ability to learn. We're not really talking about what might be called ontological trust. That is, we don't expect the machine to understand the world, or do we? And that's where we get into that interesting question of, where is the trust factor when something, say, is a medical issue that needs lots of data crunch very fast? And can we cure cancer, for example, by using this kind of technological evolution, or will we be taken off course by it because of the way in which it, so there are big questions here in that regard.
I think there's a lot of present danger in terms of the fact that AI is everywhere. This is not something that just developed with GPT. There's been reliance on AI, and when you use a search engine on your computer, but all kinds of industrial applications, various kinds of data processing and machine learning have figured into that, along with the old-fashioned kind of AI that's more sort of logical and structured. And when it comes to AI that's not entirely transparent and isn't always guaranteed to be accurate, it's not clear that we can trust every answer that's given, even though I think human beings have a tendency to think, well, a computer did it, this must be right. And if a computer is making a decision about whom to hire or who gets a mortgage, and it's a large system that, to some degree, even the creators of the system don't fully understand, there are some dangers that there's going to be unfair treatment. And we've seen that specifically when it comes to biases that get reproduced in these systems, depending on the kind of data that's given to the system and how it's trained. We found racial biases and all kinds of other biases in terms of how the systems operate.
So is that an instance of, it's, the AI program, if that's the right word? I'm just a total novice, right? The AI tool, maybe, is it only as good as the person that's inputting the data or writing the code, if you will?
Well, it's only as good as the original data it gets. And some of these large language models are just trained on vast amounts of internet data. So it's basically feeding a good deal of the internet into it, with all the biases that people have when they're writing things on the internet. And, it's a select group of people who are writing things that are on the internet. And a small group of people of a certain background are writing things on the internet. And then it's a matter of how these things are trained as well, because there's a lot of human training that goes into AI, and there's not always a guarantee that the people training the AI aren't going to build their biases into the.
And I guess that was you said that question much better than I did. That's exactly what I was hoping to get at, right? Is that the folks that are humans that are starting it, right? They have their own biases and their own priorities, maybe, and that, I'm assuming, can seep into whatever tool is being used.
Yeah, there are also biases reflected in which initial data is put into the system. So early on in facial recognition, there were some issues recognizing Black faces and identifying Black people as opposed to white people. And it didn't do as well with other races as it did with white people, just because people were feeding all these images taken from the internet without sort of sorting through and figuring out where they come from. And it was an unreflective data set. It didn't really reflect the public at large. And people are working on this. To some degree, it's an engineering problem, but these kinds of issues have come up before.
Graham, you want to add anything?
Well, I was going to say one of the things that struck me thinking further before we got together was just how much we're actually talking about issues of humanity and not issues of technology, and I think this is where it's the powerful nature of this particular technological evolution that is the issue. But, as I say, you come back to that question, is it not humanity that we're actually criticizing when we talk about these things in many ways? And how do we actually manage that balancing act between a new powerful technology and the things that we find out in the world that we really do find are full of biases and so on?
So AI is not new. It's been around. As you mentioned, it's had different applications, right? So I'm thinking of, and it may not be the best comparison, right? But social media, we've had that now for what, 15 years, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really, where it's been hot and rolling. So there's two things about that. Number one are the algorithms that are behind, say, a Facebook feed or a Twitter feed. Would you qualify that as AI? And then two, is there a comparison that can be made between the sort of information superhighway of the internet, even back in its infancy, but through to the use of social media, with the unintended consequences that those tools themselves have had on society, on humanity? Is there that concern with what the future of AI might be?
Yeah, I find this fascinating. And again, I find it fascinating from a point of view of comparative thinking. You think back through, the Artificial Intelligence Journal that emerged in 1970 is mostly a journal full of things about the technology itself. It's not really a journal for at the beginning talking about issues such as this. As we emerge, we start to see more and more people questioning what is artificial intelligence anyway. So I get to a point where you realize even those that are working in the field regularly are questioning where it starts and finishes. So you've always got those questions coming up, but increasingly ethical questions arise. And by the time you get into, it's 2021, I think it was the journal Ethics and AI was born. So, you basically 51 years later, we start to find people actually creating entire journals to get into the questions like this. So my answer really is that there's an element there that's always been a question of the application emerging into questions of what eventually becomes, but what have we done? And you see this with most things. If you think about in terms of technologies, you think about what occurred in the mid-1990s with the low degree of interest in what was happening in this weird technology where there was a blinking green light on a black screen. And folks that recognized that there were both commercial opportunities and potential issues didn't emerge immediately, but began to emerge by the time we came to the early 2000s. But there are a lot of people that did kind of what Fritz did in the answer to an earlier question, is went straight to that. What is the leverage I can do with this in terms of commercial value? So I think that sort of interesting aspect there is that also comes back to how do we define it? How do we define what we're talking about?
I would say social media algorithms are definitely a kind of artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I think there are varieties of algorithms for different products, and they achieve certain things that people might want to do, like get someone's attention. And so, the algorithm behind TikTok has been awfully good at getting people's attention. And so the algorithm behind Facebook was supposed to get engagement with people, getting people talking to each other. I don't think anyone wanted those algorithms to just get people to read things that reinforce their views and put them inside these kinds of bubbles where everyone is reading only things they believe and not encountering people who don't believe the same things they do. But that was an unintended consequence. If you could just imagine a curated Facebook where there were, very kind hosts putting the posts in front of you that they might want you to read, they might have given you some more exposure to things that you didn't already believe. So when I talked earlier about, computers don't necessarily give you the result that would be ideal, I think that might be a case of it.
So we have a couple audience questions that we'll get to, and this provides an opportunity for me to plug the Q&A. If you're attending the session and you want to ask a question, pop it in the Q&A, and we'll get to it. If we can talk a little bit, because one of the audience questions has to do with those specific language models, Chat GPT, and is it Bard from Google is the other one. Even Twitter has got one, or X has got one that Elon has been spouting off about. Anyway, I'll ask two questions. One, do they think like people think? And two, what's the difference between intelligence that we have and intelligence that a AI tool has?
Well, that sounds like a philosophical question, so I'll start if that's okay.
Absolutely.
I don't think they think very much like a typical human would do in answering the kind of questions they're given, because primarily what they're doing is trying to find which words and phrases probably occur near other words and phrases. So they're trying to find the likelihood that certain words should be strung together. And because of the transformer architecture, which is quite amazing, they're able to string it together into long, coherent passages and process a lot of novel prompts and novel data to do that. But I can't imagine you found a person who went around just gathering things from the internet and looking at how likely they occur together and putting them together in terms of their likelihood of occurring together. That isn't really the way a human being thinks, I don't think.
I just published a short editorial on this, so it's because I just had to come up with some response to what are we talking about with this notion of intelligence when it links to, and this was discussed at the early Alan Turing paper about machine thinking. He targeted both the words machine and thinking. So I think it's about time we target the word intelligence here. So it's a really good question. And my argument was real simple. We've probably got it wrong for a lot of years, that we've defined intelligence in a certain way. The element that I figure has been missing in that definition has been creativity, which Fritz has just kind of touched on there. And it's that way in which the imagination plays a role in what we would consider intelligence to be. And we've somewhat downgraded it over the years. We could spend another 2 hours thinking about why we've done that. But I think it's a really key point at this point in history to say, are we really talking about intelligence when we talk about AI, or are we talking about something in a very narrow sense of what that means?
So related to that, I think, is a question from, well, we've got, as I said, we got two audience questions so far. The first one simply wants to know if we can call tonight happy hour instead of office hours, which that's an anonymous question. You do you, whatever you want. I'm all for it. Carson, however, asks a question. He wants to know, how far away are we from a tool like Chat GPT being able to ask an opinion or offer an opinion and a true opinion? Or is that what it's doing now?
Well, I've certainly, Graham, do you want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Fritz. Yeah, go ahead.
I've certainly asked these to provide opinions, and they're glad to do so. So if you give it a prompt that asks a opinion question, it will produce an answer that offers an opinion. And so I don't know that that's an opinion in the kind of creative sense that Graham is talking about. It can certainly reproduce opinions that other people have had and summarize opinions that other people have had. But these models are made to react to you when you ask it a question like a person would. That's the way they're trained. And so if you ask it, I actually asked several of my questions from my introduction to philosophy exam on ChatGPT, and it did pretty well. And in questions where I ask, do you think this philosopher has a good argument? And it will give you opinion answers.
Yeah, I think it's a real opportunity at the moment, as I say, to have a look at exactly what we're asking of these things and whether the mimicry has the potential to become what obviously is called artificial general intelligence, and that it still has a substantial theoretical aspect to it. Artificial general intelligence is course what everybody refers to when they start pointing towards Terminator movies and so on. You know, it really is that notion that it's not just mimicry anymore, and it's not just answering a question that's posed in that way, nor is it actually sort of building in a heuristic way on the questions that are asked to create the interpretation or the impression that it's actually coming up with its own stuff. But if we're heading towards artificial general intelligence, then yeah, the answer is eventually at some point. And how close is it is probably the biggest question that everybody's asking at the moment with the speed at which we're moving. I would also throw in, just as a sort of a key point here, in the early 1990s, when we were faced with the question of moving to this contemporary digital world, because we were in a digital world in another sense long before that, we didn't have the tools in the early 1990s to move at the speed we're now moving. That digital evolution in the early 90s gave us those tools, and now we're moving at a speed that scares the life out of a lot of people because of having that digital capacity. And I would say that's the scariest thing about getting to artificial general intelligence and machine intelligence to that extent, because we are moving at a speed that we already can't keep up with because of the digital revolution at the beginning of the 1990s.
So that I think is a really great segue to dive a little deeper into the ethics of all this, right? And I think that Graham, the point you make it makes me think back to an interview that I saw with one of the architects of one of these. I think it was architect of Chat GPT, and it was a 60 minutes interview, I believe. And at the end of it, you know, he started to argue that we got to pump the brakes on this stuff. And because it was getting ahead of where they wanted it to be. And I think that was it had to be a real surprise for those folks. So I wonder what you all think about pumping the brakes, and even the folks that are driving the train are saying, hey, we got to slow down a little bit here.
Well, I'll jump in and say, I'm not sure it's possible. Truly possible to pump them. You may pump them, but I'm still thinking that, you know, that the vehicle is heading along it. So my personal opinion is I'm not sure how much we can pump them. The second thing is, I'd say, just after Twitter emerged, which again is scarily not that far back, but just after it emerged, some psychologists did a study of tweets, and it was a really quickly done project, but it was done with a fair number of people, and they looked at the way in which those characters were being used. And the experiment was, somebody said, I went to the grocery store, I got some gas, I killed my grandmother, I went to school, and nobody even noticed the grandmother was in the story, because that whole scenario lacked any moral context, and it lacked any, and that was a speed related thing. So I would say, again, I'm not sure how much we can pump. And also, yes, the speed is an issue.
So is it just a runaway train? Is that where we're on?
I hope not. I might just have hope, but I hope not. I think we can learn lessons from past mistakes. We didn't really do anything about the rapid growth of social media. And I think people have some regrets right now about the fact that we didn't regulate social media. We weren't involved. They're trying to change this now and change the way that large companies are regulated, and there's some antitrust work with the current administration and looking at some of these large companies. So I would hope people learn from their lessons and get ahead of some of these things in terms of regulation. But it's so difficult with the current political environment. Dave, you probably know a lot more about this than I do, getting anyone to first understand these things in just US politics, then getting people to cooperate in the United States to get more than the executive order that the president, Joe Biden, just put forward, but real legislation. And then I think what would really be required for the best outcome is international cooperation. You mentioned China before. I mean, we're in kind of an arms race with China right now in developing some of the most sophisticated forms of AI. And without international cooperation, I don't really think we can get ahead of some of the dangers of this.
So the regulation piece is fascinating, right? Because we are seeing at least the Congress start to ask some questions about it, and it's probably a decade too late, right? I mean, that's the real one of the problems, and maybe they will learn their lesson. But I also wonder, and this is where some, I think, of the political divide will be, is between those folks who want to regulate it very tightly, and those folks who may want some regulation but are unsure if it's legal or constitutional. Because again, right, though, there will be constitutional questions about speech, and not that the machine has got freedom of speech, but the folks that are writing that are making the tools, you know, are you going to stifle their creativity, and can the government really do that? That, I think, is where the big fights are going to be, and I don't know what the answers are. I mean, if I wish I did, but I don't. I mean, and again, I think that's just part of this sort of new world that we're in. Okay. Kevin in Cincinnati wants to know, can you define the concept of ethics in AI? Does it apply in the same way across various spheres of life and cultures?
So this sounds like a question for me, doesn't it? There's someone from Cincinnati here. That's very impressive.
Oh yeah.
There are a lot of different ethical frameworks. There are a lot of different ways that people look at what's right and wrong from house to house on your street. People disagree about a lot of things. I think you can find some agreement on some things, but there are a lot of political issues people are going to disagree about in certain ways. I hope we can find some things like privacy that we can find some agreement on, fairness in terms of, you know, who's benefiting from some of this work, and whose work might be used in producing some of this work, and how fairly they're treated. So I think there are certain kind of basic rights that we might agree on. Now, when I talk about international cooperation, there might be disagreement on what priority to place on some of those issues. But I think there are certain issues that I'd hope a lot of people can agree on in these matters.
I think
Grant, thoughts?
I was going to say, I think the transparency aspect is going to fascinate us more and more generally, but also in education, of course. And it's a question that's always worth posing at this point in history is, you know, if we know a student has produced something using AI, are we happy with it? If it's transparent, that we know that's been the case, are we not happy? So transparency is going to be a big one, even for us, in a very general, and actually it already is. So we just don't know how much it is. And so that's going to continue to be one. I think ultimately that transparency aspect is going to thread its way through a lot of industries. There are questions, dare I say, to take that to the next stage of higher education transparency, is if we are doing degree programs, we're doing education based on what the economy looks like pre-AI getting so rolled out. Are we being transparent? That's going to be a big question for us real soon.
In terms of, and I'll tie this to transparency, but Emily wants to know what she asks, what's your take on AI art and the lack of permissions when AI pulls from real artists' work online?
But this is in the courts right now.
Right. Yeah.
And it's going to be fascinating to see how this turns out. And with a lot of these things, we've seen this movie before. And so Google was in the courts when it scanned a lot of books that were under copyright. And that's how we have Google Books now. And there was a court ruling on it, and it was allowed because it was considered fair use. Is that the precedent that's going to be set for this? I mean, I'm a writer. You are both writers. We've published a lot. Our work is probably being used to train some model. I even asked GPT to write a story in the style of Graham Harper. And Graham, you might be worried to hear that it was very quickly producing a story in your style. And so who should benefit if someone sells something like that? If you ask it to generate images, to get back to the question, if you ask it to generate images of Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or Pikachu or anyone else, these image generators that are based on the same technology will generate images of intellectual property that belongs to Disney and other companies. So they might take an interest in how their material is being used to produce AI work. And so it'll be interesting to see how that works out in the courts.
So, you know, I'm as you say that, right, that it would generate imagery based on what's already been done, right? But don't we do that now as human beings, right? If we see something and are inspired by, say, a painting or a sculpture, and we want to go create our own thing, is there not the same kind of, it's not copying, but you know, we're inspired by it and we draw from that, right? So what's the difference?
I like when children draw pictures of Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck, but they're not building businesses that make billions of dollars on top of it.
Fair enough. Good point.
Disney might start to take some interest when there's money involved.
So, and now here's another transparency piece, right? Is the political world is worried sick about just the proliferation of deep fakes, especially as we get into an election cycle, right? When there are going to be videos made of candidate A saying something that candidate A never said, and then that video is going to be put out there by candidate B or candidate B's allies, and they're going to say, see what a bad person candidate A is, right? When it's all fake, right? So is that kind of, are deep fakes also AI, since it's taking something, or is that a little bit more dastardly manipulation by people?
It's all dastardly, Dave. I think. What again? I try to put it in context, and I think, what was it like when the printing press started to first impact on people, and people began to read things and say, well, I'm not sure he really said that, even though it's in this newfangled book thing, I'm not sure. You know, and I think, okay, put it in context. The difference is how ubiquitous this is and how quick it's going and how, you know, strong, powerful it is. And that we've seen this with social media in, again, the last presidential election, the sort of, you know, the aspects of this where you can go so fast and so convincingly across such a range of population. So it's not the act itself, it's actually that kind of meta level of how fast it gets out there and how powerful it becomes. So I think you're entirely right. I mean, what we're going to see then, deep fakes are definitely in that AI category, and they're going to get better and better in so many ways. And some of the scary sort of live action things that you see that look exactly like Brad Pitt doing something Brad Pitt never did, you know, is already out there. And you're going to see that in political terms, no doubt in the world.
I'm only surprised we haven't had an international incident because of it already,
right.
honestly.
Yeah. Boy, now that you say that, it would not be, right? It would be very easy to just stoke the flames and have something really bad happen. Scary.
Go back to very reasonably recent history, and I think about the movie War Games. It was what, mid 1980s. Same scenario. I think the character was a computer called Joshua, if I recall, and Joshua made Joshua's own decision about nuclear war. So we're not talking about something that just happened in 2022 here.
Next audience question, Dan in Chicago. Dan is a 07 marketing grad from the School of Business Administration. He's also a poli-sci minor, and he's not taking credit for that, so I'm going to ding him on that. But here's Dan's question. It's a long one. It's no secret that much of Silicon Valley is left-leaning. He even provides a source. Open Secrets, which is the Center for Responsive Politics, notes that Silicon Valley gave 96% of all of its political donations to Democrats in 2020. Is there concern that the AI developers who are coding within platform-specific content moderation parameters, such as ClickUp, Jasper, or Notion, could censor mainstream, centrist, or right-leaning views because it does not align with the political narrative AI platform executives? Whew, that was a mouthful.
It's a mouthful. And yes, it's a concern. there are people that are already expressing that concern, and Dan's done that quite well as well. So,
Fritz, any thoughts?
Well, this sounds more like humans doing the moderating rather than AI doing the moderating. So it's more of a human issue than an AI issue, I think.
Got it.
it is interesting though that we come back to that. I think Fritz has done exactly what we're talking before. Many of these things that we're coming back to are issues of human ethics and human biases, and we're actually putting it onto a machine culture as if somehow the machine has done it. Well, it's not the machine that's created this, it's us with that tool, and then thinking about, you know, what the extent of the problem is when the tool becomes so powerful, you know. So it's not the machine that's doing that.
So one of you mentioned this a short time ago. If a student uses AI, you know, it used to be that students would copy and paste from a website and turn it in as their paper, and then they would start to they could go to an online site and pay for somebody else to write their paper. You know, I'm sure you both were good at finding those, like I am. Those are pretty easy to detect. But is AI a whole nother story when we're talking about its uses on college campuses? And am I naive to think that I could spot it if it was turned in as a paper?
Shall I go, Fritz, and you can jump in?
Go ahead, please.
So I would say, you know, something like Zero GPT, which purports to be able to find, you know, AI generated text, does a pretty decent job, but not perfect job. So you've got tools out there, and there's more tools than just Zero GPT, which does that, but there are tools. Having said that, I've already adjusted some things in the Honours College because I was aware that it was possible, and not just possible, but it was already happening. But what I've done is really turn it back towards the more personal and the more individual. So I ask for answers that involve things that a machine can't know because they're effectively not out there on the web, and they're directly related to that particular student. That's a slight, but possibly the beginning of a bigger teaching strategy change. And so, yes, I think it is naive to believe that we will keep up with a technology that's got so much power behind it in every sense of the word power. But at the same time, there are ways to adjust to it, and maybe even ways to see opportunities in it.
Yeah, I think it's time for instructors to be more creative in the kinds of assignments they give. We're really going to have to think this through. I give more in-person writing assignments than I did before, but also there's a kind of assignment I've used for a long time where I ask the students to have a conversation with each other about the philosophical issue, and then write about the conversation. You know, they might be in a group of 5 students, and then write about what each student said. There are certain skills they're going to have to use to reproduce each other's points and arguments that can't necessarily be generated as, you know, an AI summary somewhere.
So I could spin that either way, right? I could say that's a good thing because it's making us as professors and scholars adapt and be current, maybe, and have and be fresh with assessments that we're doing, and maybe tap into things that wouldn't be tapped into if we were just sort of using the old way of thinking, right? And that's a good thing, right? But I could also see that somebody could spin it and say, well, why do I have to adapt? Because of this computer thing is making me teach my classes the way that I don't want to teach my classes, right? So it's I think it could go both ways, right? Or you could find people out there that would say that it's on both sides of that fence, right?
I really think it's moving students along to a higher level of thinking in terms of our assignments is something we should be doing. Graham mentioned originality, and sort of the hallmark of a good academic paper, like a good philosophy paper in my field, is saying something new that hasn't been said before about a subject matter. And generally, when I've looked at AI written essays in philosophy, ask the machine to write them for me. They're never terribly original. They usually present points that have been made several times before, usually without good citations. And so something like that might be a adequate student paper, but maybe we should be pushing originality earlier on in the stage of teaching.
So I'm obviously going to agree with Fritz on the originality side. I'm going to actually be a little bit both more optimistic and more pessimistic at the same time on another issue, which is I think that the question is in terms of cognitive development, what we might miss out on or fail to encourage if we find ourselves accepting the machine thinking, as I was saying earlier, as a sort of starting point for thinking generally. So what concerns me a little bit is just how creative we can all get and how much we can see an opportunity when you've got something that actually allows relatively ease of access and ease of use, but it also potentially gives us a chance to not develop ways of thinking that can develop when you put people in situations that don't involve it. So I'm sort of thinking what happened during COVID, and we saw people sort of distanced, and we can notice that that seems to have had an effect on the way people interact and the way in which some thinking has changed. It bothers me that this could be a version of that if we start to accept that, all right, well, you know, we want you to be creative with it, but otherwise we haven't got a problem. There's a little bit, I think it's going to have to be more nuanced, and I think we're going to have to actually get pretty proactive with how we begin to introduce. I think what Fritz talking about is brilliant, because you're bringing it back to this human interaction notion that you can't replicate, and that's where we're going to have to go pretty quickly, I think.
So I think that's an interesting way to transition to thinking about the future, right? Sort of where we're headed, and you've both been very persuasive in saying that, you know, we are moving fast. It is we're going to get there whether we like it or not, right? That sort of thing. But you know, in terms of, and let's just think about higher ed for a second. We face challenges in higher ed with questions of the usefulness of a college degree. You know, that's growing out in the public, right? People wondering if it's worth the investment. And I mean, we know that it is, and there's data that back that up with on earnings and other things. And I'm somebody who certainly thinks that being a college student is a benefit, because you learn more than just your subject matter when you're in college, right? You learn how to be an engaged citizen sometimes, right? I mean, that's a big piece of it. But so I guess I'm wondering, does AI feed that narrative of college isn't necessary, college is overrated, because you can get all the answers if you just put it into an AI tool. And if the answer is yes, right, are we not just us on a college campus, but are we all going to be replaced by machines?
Yeah, okay. I can go. If Fritz won't go, I'll go on this one first.
Oh, I'll get there eventually. I just want to hear what you have to say about this.
I think it's just because this one gets us into a place. I think both of us maybe would take a breath before we answer, because I think actually, and to be entirely rude, I think it depends on the college. Because I really do think we come back to what are we up to? What are we doing? What are we focusing? Where is our decision making? How good are we at using our supposedly higher education to investigate, explore, and dig deep into things in a way that actually you cannot mimic, and ultimately in a way that actually makes the experience, and I mean the live in person as well as the on Zoom and all other kinds of experiences, that makes it distinctive. And I get the horrible feeling that folks sometimes work at the level of a sort of surface level of higher education as a business and not necessarily dig deep in. So I'm sort of letting multiple cats out of my bag here by saying this, but I think we have an opportunity that hasn't been surpassed since the mid-1990s to take a technological evolution and do something with it that makes higher education relevant for the rest of the 21st century and beyond. But I do get the horrible feeling that there will be folks that don't recognize that or don't rise to the occasion and kind of reduce the experience to something that is so replicable by a machine that, frankly, yes, it's pointless to imagine a difference. And that's where students will say, well, I'll pay for this machine. It's $3,000 for a degree and it's $40,000 for a degree over there. I'll take the machine one. Thank you very much. And that will be, unfortunately, our problem. We will have generated that, not necessarily at Oakland, of course, but that will happen in the sector. And I think we'll find institutions being closed on the basis of bad decision making.
Bad decision making. Sorry, just a quick follow-up. Bad decision making on AI strategy.
On strategy that's related to the existence of AI and other things in the contemporary world. But certainly AI is going to be a big focus of, you know, how much are you going to go into certain areas of provision? You know, what are you going to provide for students and how much are you going to be convinced at an administrative level that you should invest in that? And I think, yeah, it is fundamentally a decision-making thing. It's not just about the technology. It's what are we doing as higher educators to prove that we are educating for a higher level of human condition, if you like. Yeah.
I think this is a situation where there's a role for higher education to play that I think needs to change in certain sorts of ways, depending on the way the future goes. And I don't know the way the future is going to go, but it does certainly seem like at least some things that we do in white collar work can be done with AI, summarizing documents, making slide decks. A lot of work that a lot of white collar workers do can be done to some degree by AI. And the analogy I've been thinking about a lot with this is free trade. So free trade, looking back, was beneficial in many ways to the economy. There's been a pushback, a serious political pushback on it. And at the same time, there are people who have been left behind by it. And we didn't do a very good job of addressing that when there were changes brought about by free trade. And I think we have to be more creative as a society about giving people new opportunities. And part of that is educating people on subjects that will be the kinds of jobs that people are doing 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now. So we need to be nimble.
Imagine that, being nimble, maybe nuanced and subtle about things. Boy, that would, there's something, there's a novel idea. I want to ask Graham about the task force at OU and what is involved in that. But I'm also going to go back to Dan in Chicago. He just submitted this. You'll love this. I inputted the text description of tonight's office hours into GPT, asking it to write a question that students, faculty, and alumni would benefit from. This is the response. Artificial intelligence, AI, has the potential to revolutionize many aspects of our lives, from the way we work to the way we interact with the world around us. However, there are also concerns about the potential negative impacts of AI, such as job displacement and the erosion of human autonomy. What are some of the considerations, practical and ethical, among academics at higher education institutions about the incorporation of AI prompt writing into the course curricula?
And you notice how ChatGPT didn't ask a question about, is it fun, or do you feel happy? It has no emotional context, right? I mean, I'm just saying that that is a brilliant non-answer, because it's a sort of thing that generates something, as Fritz pointed out earlier, that will be the answer that's expected. And it's not that it's wrong, and it's actually well written in some ways, but it lacks that core human empathetic element, and it always is going to, I think, unless there is some way that artificial general intelligence becomes the norm. And as I say, that currently is theoretical. So not nice answer, ChatGPT, but that's that's maybe a B-.
What's your rubric? What was the rubric you used in that grant? I'm just kidding. Fritz, what do you make of that AI generated question?
I think I agree with Graham on that one. I'll just leave it there.
I will agree. It was pretty nicely written. I would, and I'll tell you, this is how I would know if somebody turned that in for an assignment. It's too well written for a college student.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah, it does raise that question exactly, and it's quite a serious answer there, Dave, because it raises the question of where we have that actual human interaction that Fritz was talking about in terms of the classroom and in terms of a paper. It is such a great opportunity for us to say, actually, that's what we mean by an intelligent answer. That machine gave us an answer, but was it actually intelligent based on what we consider human intelligence to be? And that's a great opportunity to be able to go forward with that as an idea, you know?
So coming back to the higher ed piece, right? And the sort of inflection point that it seems like some institutions will take advantage of and others will fall by the wayside. So is it really about institutions of higher education being entrepreneurial and forward thinking and taking advantage of seeing this as an opportunity rather than a threat?
Well, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think so. I think we haven't missed the boat, but the boat is kind of, steaming up in the harbor, and we better get on it and get moving, because I think it is. But I wouldn't even say entrepreneurial. I think basically it is the future of what education might mean. It might, it's going to link to the notion of how do you mean we develop a knowledge? It's the knowledge economy 2.0, because, we were talking about knowledge economy not that many years ago on the back of digital technology. Now we're talking about a new version of knowledge economy. And if you say knowledge economy, you're pointing at the university sector. So, this is the new version. What are we going to do about it?
Fritz?
I agree completely. Once again, I'm sorry.
No, you're good. We're being efficient. We got just a couple minutes left. Graham, can you tell us, give us the 2-minute version of the OU AI task force?
I tried to give you a 1-minute version in case Fritz has got something to pitch on him. But basically, the idea was we spoke to the president. She thought this was a great idea to do this. We just simply have got a few people together. It's only a smallish group, just to start bouncing around some ideas that will ultimately lead to probably bigger discussions and wider discussions and so on. Building on what's already out there, there's been a few reports done. University of Michigan's done one with a ginormous group of people talking about things. So we just really want to bounce some ideas around and say, this looks like an opportunity. What do we want to do with it? And how does it affect our daily life at Oakland? So that's essentially it.
I would use this as an opportunity to sell people on my philosophy of AI class this winter term, but it's already full. I have a completely full class in my online class on philosophy of AI.
That's awesome, right? I mean, that tells you that that you're doing something right in the philosophy department. You got folks that are banging down the door to get in those courses. That's awesome. And with that, it's the clock strikes 8. So we want to be respectful of everybody's time. And so I'll just say thank you to Fritz and Graham. Really appreciate the two of you giving your time to Office Hours in our series. And can't thank you enough. Appreciate your time. Wonderful, engaging discussion, really fascinating stuff. And for those out there in the Zoom world, keep an eye out for our next Office Hours session, which will be coming up probably after the first of the year. With that, we'll bid everybody a good night, and thanks for tuning in.
Dave.